Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome to our online teaching academy Ekalaiva, Cbse Class 12 Accountancy. Today we are going to learn how to pass journal entries for forfeiture and reissue of shares which were allotted on pro rata. Now we'll learn it by solving sum number 76 from the exercise. Alpha Limited invited applications for issuing 75,000 equity shares of rupees 10 each. The amount was payable as follows. On application and allotment, rupees 4 per share. On first call, rupees 3 per share. On second and final call, balance amount. Applications for 1 lakh shares were received. Shares were allotted to all applicants on pro rata basis, and excess money received with applications was transferred towards sums due on first call. So the issued number of shares is 75,000, but the application received is for 1 lakh shares. Okay. So first we will write the column heads in the books of Alpha Limited. Journal. Then we'll write the column heads. Yes. So first entry is for the application money received. Okay. Bank account debit. We received 1 lakh applications and the application amount is 4 rupees per share. Okay. So the total money received is 4 lakh. To equity shares, application and allotment. Write the narration as being application money received on 1 lakh shares of rupees 4 per share. Now we have to transfer the application amount to the share capital account by allotting the shares. Okay. Here in this case we have oversubscription and we have allotted shares to all applicants on pro rata basis, and the excess has been adjusted towards the sums due on first call as given in the question. Okay, so now we are going to pass transfer entry. So equity shares, application and allotment account debit to, we are supposed to allot only the issued number of shares. Okay, so equity share capital account is credited with the amount which is only for 75,000 shares. Out of 4,000, only 3 lakh will be transferred to capital account, and the balance is adjusted towards share first call. Okay, and we can use calls in advance here. So calls in advance account, balance 1 lakh. Now write the narration being equity shares allotted. Now the next entry is for the sum due on share first call. Equity shares first call account debit for 75,000 shares. 3 rupees per share is collected for first call. So 2,25,000 to equity share capital account. Okay. So this is the due amount being first call money due on 75,000 shares at rupees 3 per share. Now we have passed the due entry, but before passing the entry for the amount received for the first call, we have to consider certain things which are given in the question. So first we'll read the question. Vibha, who was allotted 750 shares, failed to pay the first call. Her shares were immediately forfeited. Afterwards, the second call was made. The amount due on second call was also received except on 1,000 shares applied by Monica. Her shares were also forfeited. All the forfeited shares were reissued to Mohit for rupees 9,000 as fully paid up. So this person Vibha has not paid the first call amount. Okay. So before passing entry for the money received on first call, we have to calculate how much is applied, how many number of shares were applied by Vibha, because only allotted shares are given here. Okay. So here we will start the working notes. Now we are going to calculate the number of shares applied by Vibha. To find this, just take the total number of shares applied in the numerator divided by number of shares allotted into number of shares allotted here. Okay. So the number of shares applied by Vibha is 1,000 shares. So now we'll see how much is the application money received. So application money received is, she has applied 1,000 shares and we have collected rupees 4 per share on application. Okay, so she has paid 4,000. Now how much is allotted to her, or how much is transferred to share capital account? Okay, here we have allotted her only 750 shares, right? So only that amount, that is 3,000, would have been transferred to share capital. Now how much is the excess amount? The excess amount is adjusted towards first call. Excess towards first call. Okay. Now, how much she has to pay on first call? Money due on first call, 750 into rupees 3. Okay. So 2,250. Right. Less how much is the excess adjusted? So the excess adjusted is rupees 1,000. So how much she has to pay? She has to pay 1,250. Money due on first call. Okay. So 1,250 has not been received from Vibha. Now we will pass the entry for the money received on first call. Okay. credits bank account debit. We already have credited calls in advance account, so we have to debit calls in advance account here. Okay, so calls in advance account has to be debited with the excess amount. Then we have calls in arrears here. Okay, so debit calls in arrears. To equity shares first call. Now for this equity shares first call, we should have received 2,25,000. Okay, now out of this we have calls in arrears of 1,250 rupees, and we also have adjusted 1 lakh towards the first call, so that is calls in advance. Now the balancing figure is the amount received in the bank, 1,23,750. Okay, so we'll write the narration. Being first call money received except on 750 shares and excess adjusted. Okay, now her shares were immediately forfeited, isn't it? So we have to pass the forfeiture entry now. To pass the forfeiture entry, we just reverse the share capital account, that is we will debit it with the called up value. Okay, she has been allotted 750 shares. Until now the called up value per share is rupees 7, right? So 5,250 is the amount called up by the company. To credit forfeited shares account with the paid up amount. Okay, for she has applied for 1,000 shares and she has paid 4,000 at the time of applying for 1,000 shares, isn't it? So 4,000 should be in the credited to the forfeited shares account as it is her paid up value. Now what is the balance amount? The balance amount is the calls in arrears. Okay, so calls in arrears has to be credited. 1,215, right? Mention the narration. Being 750 shares forfeited for non-payment of first call. Okay, now we have to pass the due entry for the second and final call. Equity shares second and final call account debit to equity share capital account. Okay, now for 7 we actually have forfeited 750 shares, so we have to calculate only for the balance number of shares, that is 74,250 into rupees 3. Okay, so the amount is 2,22,750. Okay, being the second and final call money due on 74,250 shares. Okay. Now coming to the next entry, money received entry. Even here in this case, we have a person called Monica who has not paid her second call, right? And she has applied for 1,000 shares. Now we will once again go back to working notes and calculate how many shares were allotted to Monica. Number of shares allotted to Monica, 75,000 by 1 lakh into 1,000, right? So it is 750 shares, right? And how much she has to pay for this 750 shares? She has to pay rupees 2,250 for the second and final call. Okay. So this amount is calls in arrears in this case. Now we'll write bank account debit. We have calls in arrears. So calls in arrears account debit to equity shares second and final call account. Okay, so we have this 2,250 as the calls in arrears amount, that is she has not paid. Okay, so balance 2,20,500 is received in bank account. So totally amount to be credited to equity share second and final call is 2,22,750 rupees. Now write the narration. Being second and final call, money received except on 750 shares. Okay, now coming to the next entry, her shares also are forfeited. Okay, so equity share capital account has to be debited with the called up value at the time of passing entry for forfeiture. Okay, so allotted number of shares 750 into 10 rupees per share. Full amount is called up. So 7,500 is the total amount called up to forfeited shares account, how much ever she has paid. Okay, so she has paid 5,250 because till first call she has paid. Okay, now how much is the pending amount or calls in arrears which we actually have debited in the previous entry? It is 2,250, right? Being 750 shares forfeited for non-payment of second and final call. Right, now we have to pass the entry for the reissue. We have reissued for rupees 9,000 and we are going to credit the share equity share capital account with full face value. Okay, so equity share capital account has to be credited with full face value, that is 1,500 into 10 rupees. So 15,000 has to be credited to equity share capital. So whatever is the difference, it has to be debited from the forfeited shares account. So debit forfeited shares account with the difference amount. Okay, so it is 6,000. Now write the narration. Being 1,500 shares reissued as fully paid. Okay, now we will have some amount left over in the forfeited shares account. So what has to be done for that? If this amount in the forfeited shares account is actually a gain for the company, so this gain has to be transferred to capital reserve, which will be the last entry for this sum. Okay, so forfeited shares account, debit to capital reserve. Amount is 3,250. We have to consider both forfeited shares account. Here in this forfeiture 5,250, and in the previous forfeiture rupees 4,000. Okay, so totally 9,250 rupees are there in the forfeited shares account, and we have taken 6,000 to compensate the loss on reissue. So balance 3,250 rupees, which is actually a gain for the company, is transferred to capital reserve account. Okay, so mention being the gain on reissue transferred to capital reserve. So today we have learned how to pass journal entries using calls in arrears and calls in advance, and what are the journal entries to be passed on forfeiture and reissue of shares, which were allotted on pro rata basis. Okay, to receive our latest updates on online videos, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you.